we're glad to have you. I'll just do a quick introduction and turn it over to you. So this is our first hybrid forum. So thank you to those of you who are here in AYCC and to those of you who are on Zoom. I think we're getting our technology worked out. And I think this will be a good format moving forward. So Suarez is a broadcast journalist who's had many, many years of experience with Mars, Talk of the Nation, and PBS's NewsHour, and Al Jazeera, and has been a guest lecturer and visiting professor, and I think he's now a podcast host. But I know him first and foremost as Ava Suarez's dad, and as a faithful Episcopalian and longtime parishioner at St. Columba's Church in Northwest Washington. So we're honored to have you here today, Ray. Thank you for making time. And we're looking forward to hearing from you about your thoughts on how we might, as people of faith, live in this crazy elections season. Turn it over to you. And there will be time for a Q&A at the end. So,
well, thank you, Ryan, and thanks for your patience in waiting till I appeared in person as opposed to on TV. When Ryan asked me to speak about faith in the public square with you this week, I immediately accepted, and only after I had accepted thought, well, what am I going to say that really fits the moment? What do you say about such debased coinage, about what might ideally be an important variable in a person, in a community, in a country, at a moment like this one that's frankly bizarre? This week, we had the President of the United States casually mentioning that he's no longer a Presbyterian, but now identifies as a non-denominational Christian. And I strongly doubt he could describe what either being a Presbyterian or being a non-denominational Christian really means. It's kind of like a flag of convenience meant for this political moment, like being a Liberian flagged freighter. I'm sure the president did not feel he was sharing with the public that he was rejecting the theology of John Calvin or had some late in life revelations on John Knox that caused him to change his mind. And now he was aligning himself with Joel Osteen or Paula White or Kenneth Copeland, to name three of the problematic superstars of America's non-denominational world. Nor was he shedding denominational identity to live out the wish of St. Paul that all may be one, helping pave the way for a day when we junk these divisions, agree on the basics, and become one big church. The president's announcement came as the Senate prepared to confirm the latest Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, Amy Coney Barrett, and her Catholicism became kind of an issue. And I say kind of because while Republicans began the confirmation hearings with guns blazing, excoriating their Democratic committee colleagues as intolerant, as imposing a religious test for high public office forbidden by the Constitution, and roaring their objections to Judge Barrett's religious scruples, we never really talked very much about what those were. Once again, religious identity became a kind of applique, a patch, or a button or badge affixed to the jacket. But by the end, it was really hard to say what, if any, effect the judge's membership in a small Christian group called People of Praise would have on the way she does her job as a justice. What hearing it would matter to the people who were listening, and what bearing that membership may have on her reading of the law or anything of the like. Americans are increasingly semi-literate when it comes to religion, having only the vaguest idea of what it means to be almost anything, beyond team affiliation, beyond sponsors' emblems like those on a NASCAR driver's jumpsuit. What does it mean to be a conservative Jew as opposed to a Reformed Jew, a Lutheran as opposed to a Roman Catholic, religious as opposed to spiritual? We've been in a peculiar trap of our own making in this country, increasingly secular, increasingly unaffiliated, and as people become less religious, we remain at least somewhat concerned, or say we're concerned, about the spiritual lives of our national leaders. But a majority of Americans say they wouldn't want the president to be an atheist. So the majority of Americans say they wouldn't want to vote for an atheist for president. And from the data, they would prefer that the president believe in something, though they appear totally unconcerned about what that is that they might believe in. So this falls into a category more like the manipulation of symbols as a proxy for real religious ideas. And it reached its apex when troops and cops tear gassed and batoned protesters in Washington, D.C. to clear the way for the president to stand in front of St. John's Church to do what? To speak up for religious freedom, to speak against vandalism done to the church? No, just to hold a Bible in the air. And before he took that walk from the White House to St. John's, often called the Church of the Presidents, President Trump was referring to it as the visual. I want to get the visual. And I think that's kind of revealing too, because here the visual was trumping the actual. What did it mean for the President of the United States to stand in front of a church and hold the Bible in the air? When a reporter standing nearby shouted the question, "Is that your Bible?" the president replied, "It's a Bible." And that is really symbol without substance. Predictably, a Catholic priest denied Joe Biden communion earlier in the campaign because the lifelong Catholic has taken a pro-choice stance toward abortion. And more recently, conservative Catholic organizations have jumped into the fray by sending out campaign materials urging faithful Catholics not to vote for Joe Biden. Yet no Catholic bishop has denounced Donald Trump's support for the death penalty. And just recently, Pope Francis made it very clear that the death penalty, when carried out by the state, is illicit. There has been no Catholic bishop speaking up in any persistent or high visibility way about the Justice Department's recent moves to try to shorten the amount of time convicted criminals spend on federal death row, shortening the trip to the death chamber after a guilty verdict at trial. So what does it tell you about the emotional resonance of the issue in a country where a minority of Americans are Catholics, but Catholics are at the same time America's largest single denomination by far? If you get the Congressional Handbook this coming January, which always comes out at the opening of a new Congress, you'll find lots of information about the 540 or so House members, senators, and delegates from places like DC and Guam and Puerto Rico, office location, phone number, offices back in the district, education, voting record, and religious affiliation. The Congressional Handbook releases what the congressperson lists as their religious affiliation. And it says something that, deep as we are into the current mass movement away from congregational affiliation, only a relative handful of members of Congress list no religion in their bio in the handbook. In this context, it may be used as a marker, a sign, and could cover everything from has rarely been in shul since his bar mitzvah to attends mass every morning. That's a pretty broad umbrella. But if Congress really represents America as a whole, it would easily include, I don't know, 150 members with no active religious affiliation or religious identity beyond a label. Along with the suspiciously few with no religious identification are a few Muslims, an increasing number of Hindus and Buddhists. And that tells us something about the changing nature of American religion since the rewrite of the immigration laws in 1965. They are a signal of something that's waiting out there later in the 21st century, an America that does not have a Christian majority. Religion in the public square, in that America, is going to mean something entirely different from what it means today. At a time when fewer and fewer Americans may share ideas about the country, about broadly held values, but are more and more likely not to share a religion at the same time, using your religion as a tool of persuasion is not going to work in the way it might have 100 years ago, when many of the forces coalesced around political reform and around reaction spoke to each other in shared religious language. We Episcopalians are a tiny minority inside a future minority. But that minority status has already given us long training in how to do pluralism. We've had to make common cause in a culture that might have some sort of reflex memory of when we were more numerous and more powerful, but really nothing more substantial than that. We build coalitions based on goals and values rather than identity, because even though the Episcopal members of Congress and Episcopal members of the White House way overstate our numbers in the society, we do not, in a strong cultural way, call the tune. So we know what it means to get some of what we want, because we alone can't get all of what we want. In my book, The Holy Vote, The Politics of Faith in America, still worth your time long after it was published, I talk about a public square where a religious basis for my support of a piece of public policy may be convincing to me, but is certainly not going to be sufficient to carry the day with somebody else. So this is what I believe. This is what my religion teaches, and I want to bend the wider society to my way of thinking is not going to work today and certainly not in the future. So what do? We wade into the fray, we enter the arena, we contend in the marketplace with other forces and with other ideas. We might do it by saying, here's what I believe. What do you believe? Here's how I get there. Here's the moral filters, the moral track I use to arrive at what I believe. How did you get there? What frameworks, what terms, what tools for analysis did you use to arrive at your opinion? A religious and a secular person may both oppose abortion rights, for example. And when you ask them why, they may get there using entirely different emotional frameworks, utterly different understandings of human rights to explain how they get there, but they do get there. Two entirely different believers may oppose capital punishment, and their reasoning might sound utterly different. My religion alone cannot convince someone who doesn't share my religion. My commitment to principles that play out in only slightly different ways for others becomes the glue that holds us together. I'm distressed when, in an increasingly diverse America, specifically Christian propositions about the world are offered as if they're still supposed to carry the day, almost in a nostalgic recreation of a church that enjoyed such numerical superiority, such institutional dominance, that it was assumed that it must be heard on any topic. That's what my religion teaches is only going to get you so far in 2020. To follow up, and if you oppose me, that means you are against my religion, isn't going to get you very far at all. Not in 2020, even less in 2030 and 2040. And what I'm not suggesting, so don't misunderstand me, is an apologetic, watered down witness in order to be popular, in order to be heard. What I'm suggesting is that the religion that creates, guides, sustains our social sentiments, that leads us to conclusions about the world, is just one tool that modern Americans are using to analyze the challenges that face us today. That, in and of itself, will not carry the day or convince anyone. So be modest, be honest, be a light to light up everyone around you. That's witness that comes from who we are. Open to listen, ready to love, clear about what we believe while understanding it's not the only thing people believe. That is, there is at the same time a backlash, a deep desire to assert the primacy of Christianity in the public space, whether it's laws to push Bibles into public school classrooms, 10 Commandments monuments on state house lawns. Look, We revere the Ten Commandments. I've been a Sunday school teacher for many years. We teach the Ten Commandments. We read the chapters in our lectionary where the Ten Commandments are first pronounced when Moses come down from Sinai. We love the Bible, but a 5-foot high granite tablet in a public place isn't going to make a believer out of anybody. And it's not going to assure a Buddhist or a Baha'i or a Muslim or an atheist that the State House or City Hall or the county building belongs to everyone, is civic space enjoyed, meant to give fair treatment to everybody. It's against the law to steal in majority Muslim countries. Murder is against the law in Buddhist Thailand and Hindu India. Insisting on the primacy of Christianity is a power play that forces compliance rather than inviting people into a deeper understanding of what we believe and what we believe God wants for his world. But there are years of these battles still to be fought as the society continues to change. If I'm going to force you to recognize me as a kind of first among equals in a plural America, what does it say about our secure knowledge of the rightness of what we hold to be true? Well, if we use those other tools to force our meaning, not much. Matthew 7:21 says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven." Religion in the American public square has become a say thing instead of a do thing, because so much stock has been placed in the showy, public, performative aspects of the Christian faith. The brand has been wrecked to the point where the most secular generation of Americans in 200 years, that is, adults under 30, when asked to name attributes of Christians. So the pollster just says to under 30s, when I say the word Christian, what does that bring up for you? They use negative terms for 7 of the 10 most often used traits. Judgmental, anti-gay, and hypocritical are the top 3. What should faith in the public square more appropriately look out like? Do you have to have pastors cluster in around your desk for a group hug or a laying on of hands? I'm sure there is a way of talking about what we share, what we believe, the nature of our lives together as worshiping communities that would communicate what we find valuable about it and show the world what we live and how that's an extension of what we say we believe. I live in Washington, D.C., which is an oddly impersonal, extremely secular environment in many ways, and marinating in religious speech and messaging at the same time. It's the place where big questions about the place of religion in public life are hashed out, on Capitol Hill and in the courts. On one of the highest points in the city stand the Peter and Paul towers of the great Gothic gem, Washington National Cathedral, a house of prayer for all people, keeping with Washington's master planner Pierre L'Enfant's vision of a great church for national purposes, and at the same time, home to an Episcopal congregation, the setting for debate and discussion on the issues of the day. All those functions being played by that wonderful space, sadly closed since March. I grew up in Brooklyn. When I was growing up, not huge Anglican territory, but now that so many more people have moved in from the West Indies, looking a lot better. And when I was a kid, one of the more common conversations that I had to have with my peers about religion was to explain, no, I'm not Roman Catholic, and no, I'm not Jewish. And it met with a kind of puzzlement from my neighbors because they didn't think there was, in fact, anything else to be. But apart from that, I rarely talked about it, except when it was specifically the subject of conversation, like at 2:15 on a Wednesday, when all the Catholic kids in class would stand up en masse and leave to go to this weird imposition on the secular school day. They would walk to church 45 minutes before the end of school for religious instruction, and there I was sitting with 16 Jews. I wouldn't bring it up at all while I was still sitting in class. I certainly didn't talk about the fact that I was an altar assistant or a crucifer. That was just my life. I did my thing, and it didn't come up much. When I began to travel around the country as a reporter, it was shocking to me to be in the South and be asked by people I still thought of as strangers, we had met all of 5 minutes ago, not if I went to church, but where I went to church, as if it was the most natural topic of conversation. Between never and always, I hope there's a more natural, integrated way of being out as a Christian in all the different realms of your life, in a way that speaks well for the faith and speaks well for you. And that there are obligations in your life that you find give you meaning and purpose and satisfaction. What could be wrong with that? If you're a good friend and a good neighbor and a good citizen, a good colleague, a good parent, and if part of what gets you there is what you've learned from Jesus, well, that's only a win for the place you live and the place you work and the people you know. And by definition, a win for a living faith that makes sense to you and helps you make sense of life in a confusing and challenging world. One of the worst things for me about bumper sticker religion is that it uses scripture and a creator and the preaching of Jesus like some sort of all-purpose magic 8-ball for which you can simply give it a shake and then look at the answer when it appears in the window, and inevitably a simple, pat answer. Is life really that easy, that uncomplicated? A few billion of our fellow beings live in grinding, degrading poverty. We follow a master who had a lot to say about wealth and poverty, justice, support, and care for others. We live in the richest country in the world with tens of millions who live in persistent poverty. The answers are elusive. What to do about that? How to answer that? The choices moving forward aren't always clear. If a decision on the SNAP program or the minimum wage or public school funding comes up, do you subject it simply to dollars and cents analysis, systems and inputs and results? Or does God's vision of a just economy, the sufferings of the poor, what is enough as we work and strive and save to have good lives ourselves? If you were at a backyard get-together and your desire to see one policy over another is based in part on Christian social vision, is that what you tell all the other people, all your neighbors in that backyard? If a petition circulated in your neighborhood to exclude multiple dwellings from your town, which would have the effect of bringing affordable housing closer by and changing the socioeconomic mix at a local public school, would you sign that petition? If you didn't want to sign it, or if you raised your hand at a local meeting called to discuss it, would you mention the Bible or Jesus? What would your neighbors think of you if you did? I don't know what the right answer is. So I'm not asking those questions out of a sure notion of what the answer is. But that beautiful old spiritual says, we are not ashamed of the gospel. And I can hear you now, that's a little harsh. No, I'm not ashamed, but it's part of my private life. And my private life, being a good resident of the Nutmeg buttoned down and sober-sided, my private life is private. I get it. And I'm definitely not saying there's only one way to handle these questions. I guess what I am saying is there's a way. If it's not the same way for everybody, there's a way that will feel natural for you, I hope, to be a lamp lifted high enough to give light to the whole house. If we believe that there's a reason for the continued existence of our church, that there's even going to be an Episcopal church in 2100, we have to have a reason to exist beyond just doing what we do, by us, for us, year in and year out. We should model a way of life that is wide awake and aware and deeply rooted in our ancient faith. And I have no doubt we can do it. Bishop Curry says the world will know us by our love. The old prayer book says people will know us by what we say, not only with our lips, but in our lives, by giving up ourselves to serve God. Or, as it says in the first chapter of James, but be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he's like a man who looks intently at his natural face in a mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away and at once forgets what he was like. But the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, will be blessed in his doing. Thank you, Ryan, for bringing me to this unusual COVID-based public appearance. I was looking forward to coming up and seeing my daughter in Manhattan and visiting you in Darien, but this will have to do for now, I guess. But thank you for letting me rile you up a little bit and bringing me into your Zoom listening posts, and I welcome your questions.
We'll turn it up, open for questions, whether you're on Zoom, you can unmute yourself, or if you're here, just stand up and be loud. And the microphone should capture it. You stumbled into silence, right? Bob, are you trying to ask a question? If you are, you're muted still.
Mr. Baker, unmute yourself. Oh, well, okay.
I have a question.
Okay, Megan, go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Suarez. Thank you so much. It was really interesting to hear what you're saying. I think about this a lot as a mother to 3 children, and then also as an educator. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the role of this concept of secular spirituality in sort of bridging the gap between the divides of religion and the societal issues that we face.
Well, a huge number of Americans now tell pollsters they are spiritual but not religious, and for me the shame of that is that I have no idea what that means. Maybe over time there will be some consensus about what that means. I think it's a sign of a couple of things. One very important thing is the yearning that people still have for some other yardstick to hold up to the world besides their own experience. So they feel in some undefinable way that there's something more to life than what they can see and touch, but they aren't sure what it is. They aren't sure what to call it. They aren't sure how to plug into it. There's also another category of people who were raised in some sort of religious faith and have put aside the family heritage, or put aside the nuclear family religious identity as young adults. They no longer actively associate with it, but there's a kind of muscle memory that's working inside them. You don't forget that easily, what you learned in Sunday school and what you learned in Bible stories and what you learned in Children's Story Hour. And that still works on them in a way. When I was a visiting professor at Amherst College, I taught a course on the secularization of millennials. And it is my conviction, from talking to my very smart kids at Amherst and from doing a lot of study before I offered the course, that for the church, there is tremendous opportunity in the millions of sums, the people who are still sort of seekers and not sure where they're going to land when all their wrestling with themselves is over. And there's also an opportunity in the millions of somes and nones, that is, the people who, when you ask them what their religious affiliation is, write none, uh, to have a values-based conversation about the future. Because, like I mentioned during my talk, the how you get there question is very potent for people who use different frameworks to arrive at the ways they agree with each other on how to move forward. So the gas that they have in the tank might be different. The nature of the engine that's pushing them forward might be different, but the goal is the same. And one big mistake, I think, that the evangelical churches made was by being AWOL on some of the biggest challenges in society, because making common cause with people who disagree with them religiously, but agree with them on the goal, meant that they could not make allies across religious lines. And moving into an increasingly secular 21st century, that's a huge weakness. So there's a lot going on out there. A lot of people do yearn for what they got out of church as kids, when they were affiliated, before they dropped out. And we're seeing sort of church-like things that pop up as experiments from time to time. One's called Sunday Assembly. A couple of entertainers in Britain said, well, what did people like about church? What did they want about church? They wanted to sing, they wanted to learn something, and they wanted to be social and be with other people. So they put together something called Sunday Assembly, which grew like wildfire across Britain, was eventually exported to the United States, but in both countries, after an initial huge spike in interest, subsided to something smaller and more modest. There are experiments with church-like bodies. One, the Lutheran Synod in New York is trying out so-called St. Lydia's Dinner Church. And they're inviting people who have no religious affiliation. They say that early Christians shared the faith around a meal. So come in on Sunday and Monday nights. You can help us prepare it if you like, or just show up to eat, and you'll sit with strangers at big tables and you'll talk. And that will be our church. And I think this gives the church a challenge. The institutional church is a challenge. I think it gives a challenge for church people who are active in social goals in one way or another, to build bridges to people who use other frameworks of analysis to organize around the pressing issues of the day. I think the landscape is littered with opportunity and promise. So I worry a lot because we've got some big challenges, but I don't worry about that stuff so much. I think there's a lot of promise there.
Ray, I have a question. Ray, moving aside from denominations for a minute, Jesus said, "I'm the way, the truth, and the light." Obviously, truth was a primary component. How do you feel about the incessant lying that takes place in the political environment?
It has done something that for a journalist is horrifying. It's debased the coinage of the truth. Sometimes the truth is really hard to find out. So when you do find it, it's precious and has to be treated with a great deal of respect and care. And the fusillade, the endless gush of lies, of distortion, of purposely confusing and misleading ideas from political leaders in Washington has been a disaster for the country, a tragedy for the country, because it makes it that much harder to make common cause on any one problem. When you manipulate the truth in the shameless and horrifying way that's been done in recent years, it leaves us disarming, taking out one of the key tools that we have for fixing things, which is the truth. Violent crime in this country cratered from the late 90s into the late teens. That was a triumph That was a tremendous thing. If you look at national violent crime statistics for cities like New York, they absolutely cratered for decades. That's a great thing. How much do you want to injure the social fabric than to go out and campaign as if America is a dysfunctional, dangerous place where you're taking your life into your hands every time you walk out the front door and should go out there armed because of that? That's someone who wants to harm the discourse, who wants to harm the fabric of a coherent society, who wants to leave us unable to solve our own problems. Because what we should be doing is saying, hey, violent crime cratered for 30 years. Let's figure out what we did right and where we did it, and try to put in models of excellence that respond to crime in a way that actually helps us fix it, instead of exploiting the continued existence of crime in a society of 330 million people in a way that may advantage, in a short-term way, your side of the argument, but doesn't do anything to mend the fabric of a torn society. It's been just devastating for me to watch this. I'm so old-fashioned in my work as a reporter and so idealistic as a person that it makes me crazy that people who know better will say things that are untrue to the public. It just drives me bananas. And it's going to take a long time to come back from it, because now the truth doesn't have to compete just with problems. It has to compete with the lies on an even footing, because they've both been turned into opinions. And once you turn both the truth and lies into opinions, well, they both have equal weight, and they have to both be heard, and they both have to be given a certain amount of deference and credence. And that's just, that way lies madness. It's a terrible, terrible development. I hope I was adamant about it to leave no doubt as to where I feel, what I feel about what's going on in our politics. It's just really awful.
Anyone want the last question?
Oh, is this the last one already? Oh, maybe my answers were too long. Sorry. Go ahead.
Anyone? Ray, maybe you can give us a final charge in the next 10 days. What would you have us do as Episcopalians in Derry?
I think encourage everybody you know to vote. It's a civic sacrament, and unfortunately has gotten a rough ride during these last 6 months. In our civic life in recent years, two tendencies have come to the fore. There's one group of people that says voting is so precious that even if by mistake we let a couple of people who shouldn't vote, if at the same time we make it easier for many, many more to vote, that I can live with. And their opposite numbers are the people who are saying, let's make it really, really hard to vote so that we minimize the people who vote improperly, even if it means that people who otherwise should be able to vote don't get to. I'm willing to make that calculation. Decide which one you are. Encourage even your neighbors who have different political convictions from your own to vote. And I think it'll be a good thing for the country if there is a clear verdict 10 days from now and a very, very high turnout. No matter where the chips fall, a high turnout would be a good thing. We have preached to the rest of the world in the entire post-war era about the value of having a people who are governed by giving their consent to the people who would govern them. And a high turnout is our way of speaking our consent. So I really hope that the turnout is fabulous. I really hope, even though it's a little inconvenient and may give you sore feet, that there are long lines wherever it is you vote. And I hope that we can lance the boil that has made religious values a divisive element of our public discussion of civic values, rather than one that gives us an organizing principle for explaining ourselves to the world and letting others explain to us why they believe what they believe. This has been a discouraging era for a values-based conversation about what we're going to do as a big, complicated country, not only here inside our borders, but out in the rest of the world as well. So let's all root for an enormous turnout, and let's all root for a more truth-based, fact-based civic debate going forward.
Thank you.